Welcome to World Talk with Friends, where the small world we live on becomes smaller as we discover neighborhoods all over the world by simply talking to our neighbors. This is Haggy Shack Radio Productions. Colleen Kelly is producing with friends Nancy, Nora, Neil, and those we have yet to meet. Welcome to our world.
And we are live.
So, hi everybody. This is the World Talk with Friends with myself, Nancy Hopkins, Nora Willow, and Colleen Kelly. And it is the Ides of March, March 15th. And we did have a time change here in the States. And so Nora got bushwhacked again because, you know, who goes over to Italy and publishes the Americans have just changed their time.
Well, you know, I didn't know it changed either until, was it Monday?
I saw that.
I think Patty said, we're on top of the hour, which was like 3 minutes. And I went, not for another hour, right? And she went, time change. I went, oh, shit.
Wow. Well, it's good that I was next to the phone because I thought I wasn't going to be on. I wasn't going to be on with you for another hour. Can you imagine that? I was actually talking to my daughter and we were in a very important subject. And then suddenly I see you calling. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I have to interrupt this. I'll call you when we're done. So, again, I apologize for that. Yeah, I had no idea. Because as I was telling you both that our time in Europe is going to change in a couple of weeks. Usually it's the last Sunday of March for Europe. So
I wish I just quit doing that.
I don't know, or at least everyone should do it at the same time.
Well, now, does the entire European, are they on the same change?
I'm not sure, but what I know is Italy, but, you know, I assume that Europe. This is just an assumption. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just Italy. But it really doesn't make sense if just Italy changes and not Europe. And we're all in the same time, you know, like GMT +1, you know, like France and wherever else, Germany. It doesn't make sense if we don't change it all at the same time. But I'll check that. Oh, very confusing. Anyway, time has changed. We're not going to worry about this for another, I don't know, 6 months?
Well, the dog's right now, and he's getting his dinner at the time that he always, you know, it's like you can't explain a change time to a dog. No, it's not 6 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock.
Oh, that's true.
So, but now he's on target again. We're both on 6. But he didn't budge for the whole time. It was 5 o'clock his time. His time was 6 o'clock, but it was 5 o'clock my time. Oh, Lordy. I don't know why they do it. Supposedly it came out of World War II when, they were afraid of night bombings so that you could see the cities because of the lights. And so they were making it up,
I thought it was because of electricity, consumption. I thought it had to do with that, like, you know, reducing electricity, like, I don't know if that makes sense. I never really understood it either.
Well, that is the original thing I think did come from World War II, but then when they decided to standardize it, you know, forever, yes, that was mentioned as being a reason, but the other reason that they keep throwing at us over here in America is that, well, you have to have the time change because otherwise the kids going to school are going to be in the dark when they catch the bus.
Ah, that's right. Okay, that makes sense.
Well, yes, but
a little bit.
Wouldn't it be better just to kind of change your time? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, it's a done deal. We've done it. You guys are going to do it. So, anyway, so yeah, so Colleen is, saying that she's in where are you in, where are you? Indiana, but she didn't get this, massive snowstorm. They had a bad snowstorm that went up the coast of, the states, you know, the northeast coast. Well, actually it started in the southern. We actually are kind of chilly here today from this thing. And, you know, my aunt who's in Binghamton, New York, supposedly has gotten 30 inches of snow.
Wow. Wow, then it's March.
So, yeah, in one day.
That's incredible.
Yes. Yeah, it's a crazy ass kind of weather that they're having and have been having. I mean, this last few years doesn't correspond to what they know. I mean, they were in 70-degree weather a bit ago, and now it's back into the 30s and 20s.
Wow. Well, the Italians call this month the crazy month. In Italian, it rhymes, so you say Marzo Pazzo. Pazzo means crazy, so it's like the crazy March, because March is always that month where time is the climate is so strange. I mean, for example, you're having problems of snow. Florida's chilly, which is, you know, a little weird, but here it's sunny. Yesterday I was actually standing outside working, and I felt like my neck and my shoulders were burning from the sun.
Really?
And now today there was sun, but it was chilly. There was like wind. So you really don't know what to wear. You have to like always have something extra just in case. So yeah, I think this, it's because it's spring. So, you know, spring is always that season where people, you know, the change of weather, they get sick. And, I have to say spring isn't my favorite season. It's beautiful to look at aesthetically. You know, you got the buds and everything. It's just gorgeous, but you know, all the pollens, allergies, it's just not the best, you know, the whole hay fever, spring fever kind of thing. I suffer from it a little bit. So, yeah, we'll see now. We're almost at the end of March. Well, hopefully April will be a little better.
Did you have the problem when you were in Saudi Arabia also?
Yes. Now, yes, of course, Saudi Arabia does not go through the 4 seasons the same way, let's say, it goes through in Europe or in the countries in the northern hemisphere, where you've got green and more nature. But you still feel the change of season, where it's from really cold to a nicer weather, and then it starts getting hotter the closer you get to June, or end of May. That's when it starts getting hot. But you still get we get other things like wind coming from I don't know where with a lot of sand, and people get allergies from the sand, and you know, because sand carries also all these bacterias. And I remember that I never had a problem. I developed a seasonal allergy from 2011. So now every time there's a seasonal change, if I don't take an antihistamine or something that stops the allergy, I can get a chronic cough for 3 months, like a really bad one. So yeah, we do have that as well.
It changed from one country to the next. I mean, because like my mother used to get allergy reactions, but she always thought it was from one single plant. I don't remember what the plant was, but she always blamed it on that plant because that was the plant that was in bloom when she seemed to come down with them. So it's just sort of like anything out there is bothering you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I get, of course, here you don't get the sand. And when I first arrived in autumn, I arrived in summer. Then, you know, I was here for autumn and I was fine. I didn't get any allergy, but I did this time. So I immediately took an antihistamine and it was better, but it didn't go completely away. I still got the cough. Remember that weird cough that we suspect that it could be like from the chemtrails? So I'm not really sure. You really don't know exactly what's the problem, but you know you're getting the symptoms. So in this case now, I don't know if it was the allergy, because I found it strange. I took the antihistamine right away, which usually it does the trick, but it didn't do the trick. You know, I had the whole cough, like the wet cough, and you know, you're almost going to choke, you know, that kind of feeling. And usually when I do take the antihistamine, I don't get that cough. It goes right away. So it's still too soon for me. I've been here for 8 months. I want to see until the next change of season if I get it again. So only then I'll be able to know if it really has to do with the country, or is it just like an allergy that I'm affected by anywhere I go. Who knows? Yeah, allergies are very tricky, you know, because there could be so many things you're allergic to. And I never had allergy problems, thank goodness. Never. I never had allergy problems all my life. I just developed this seasonal allergy in 2011. And that's actually, ironically, the same year I developed migraines. So I never had migraines, never had allergies, and I just got them all at the same time.
Well, they may be partially connected. I think your migraines can often be a sinus thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, the sinus is obviously connected with the allergies because my sinus goes crazy when that happens. So I also has to do with the vibrational change in the body. We talk about that, right? It could, because, I mean, I always share with you that my reawakening started when I was 19, and it was a journey till now that I'm 33. But it almost feels like from 2011, it was end of 2011, so it was closer to 2012. That's, I think, really the year where there was a really huge shift, and that's where my real big problems happened, like the real, like, last challenges of training before getting to where I am right now. So I think, I almost suspect that it has to do a little bit with a vibrational change within myself. So my body is trying to kind of readapt to the new energy, to the new vibration. It could not be that, but I suspect that could be it.
Well, there was some, and I didn't know her. It was the first time I'd seen her writing, but it resonated with me. And it was a Facebook posting, and she said a lot of people had this weird kind of, well, Colleen was the first one that came down with it. I'm not sure it's the same thing, but it was all over in the area where she was at. And, it's the same thing. It's like, you just, it's all cold symptoms or, but they don't get so bad. They'll get you knocked down. You get exhausted, for a while, but it just doesn't go away. And she said that she had been getting reports of this, cold-like symptoms that don't go away, and that the normal things from antihistamines to herbal aren't working. It's just there. And she said that her reading is that the earth was giving off a tremendous amount of energy that was basically grief energy. And that,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
We've still got this, they're calling it a flu thing going around here. They're not allowing children under the age of 18 to go visit people in the hospital. And the hospitals are packed with patients. So,
wow.
Yeah, whatever this is rather rampant.
Well, this other thing that she was specifically talking in terms of light workers. So I don't know, you could have something different than what's out there, but what I found interesting was her focusing in on the energy being that of grief. And I don't remember who I was listening to, because I've been listening to so many people, and it might have been Joseph Gabi, I'm not sure, but somebody, maybe you heard it, Colleen, somebody said something about grief and the lung area, that grief is associated with the lungs. And, it's just like, well, maybe this is some kind of a grief release. I don't know. But, I'm just kind of over it. It's, not,
yeah.
But we'll be okay. We're going to get over this. So let me ask you this. The Ides of March, is this of any interest to those people over in Italy? Because
what do you mean by that? And I didn't understand exactly the terminology.
Well, the Ides of March is the 15th of March because that's when, I've always known it as being when Julius Caesar was assassinated.
Oh.
And that, my understanding is that it's when he was assassinated that it sort of took this dark look to it, but nobody paid any attention to it until it ended up as Shakespeare.
Okay. Sorry for my ignorance. No, I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
Because that's why I'm asking you. Because over here in America, it's like beware of the Ides of March. It is something that most people understand, and that's why I was asking you. As somebody who grew up in Saudi Arabia, I'm sure, because when you look it up, there's nothing wrong, nothing that bad happened to it except that Caesar died and Shakespeare made a statement about it.
Uh-huh. Oh, well, I'm gonna have to check that out, but for sure, I mean, hearing what you're saying, then for sure there may be something here, but I haven't heard anything like that. I'll definitely check that out, but unfortunately I can't give you any comments on that, as I really have no idea about it.
Well, the very fact you don't know anything about it is probably indicative that this is something weird in America. Or
maybe.
Probably too.
Well, because, my mom is a very cultured person. I mean, oh my God. I mean, the things that I learned from her. And this is one thing that I never heard her mention. So, but you've made me curious. I'm going to do some research on that to see if this is a thing here. Because, Julius Caesar versus Rome, the Roman Empire. So.
18th of March, Ides. And what the heck did they say that Ides was? Ides derives from the Latin word for to divide. So what's that got to do with it? It's just one of those.
Middle of the month?
That's the only thing I can think of, but still, Okay, so what about St. Patrick's Day? Do you ever, I'm sure in Saudi Arabia you probably did.
No. But none of these saint days are, Saudi is full-blown Muslim country. They don't do anything on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, it's an interesting, because over here it's like, what was the figures on that thing? Let me see if I can find that. Okay, so the reason that, yes, it was big in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day. I'm sure that it was only Ireland, but from 1820 to 1860, almost, oh my goodness, how many is that? Oh my heavens, I can't even figure this out. It was like 2 million Irish people came into the country, and of course at that time that was a lot of people. And that 75% of them was because of the Irish famine, where the potatoes all went bad, and so of the total immigrants from 1820 to 1860, many of them died just getting across the ocean because of the awful conditions of the ships themselves. And then they came over here and they ended up basically being in slums. There's the stories of like Boston, but it was just not only was there the problem of all these people coming into the country that would take the lower paying jobs, so therefore you've got the same situation you've got in any kind of environment where you've got an immigration happening, that the people at the lower echelon of the economy are losing their jobs to these immigrants. And so there's a contention begins to develop between these groups down there. But beyond that, the Irish were Catholic, and of course they're coming into a basically Protestant nation at the time. And there was a tremendous amount of anti-Irish simply because of the fear of what this would do to the voting. Oh my God, you got these Catholics now instead of these. But what was really kind of, because I was looking at the overall history of it, but what was really interesting is that it was the Civil War. A lot of these immigrants joined either the North or the South to get a job. And so it was the Civil War that sort of like started to give a portion of the immigrants a way of getting out of those slums. But then after the war, there was so much building. Not only was it trying to rebuild, it was trying to build new railroads, industry. Everything really started happening. It was the Industrial Revolution really picking up at that point. And so So the Irish, again, would take the lower paying jobs, the jobs in the industries and stuff, but it was much more than what they had. So they began to come out of that poverty level through this. Actually, it was the Industrial Revolution. And in 100 years from when we're talking, really, 1860, you've got the election of 1960 of John Kennedy. Not only of absolute Irish descent is his Patrick, his grandfather, was a farmer in Ireland. But in 100 years, the Irish had an Irish Catholic president.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean,
I didn't know there was much animosity towards the Irish.
Oh, terrible. They were the most impoverished immigrants that had come to the United States at that point.
They were also the first enslaved people over here.
How so?
Really?
When they fought the war with the British, and they lost against Cromwell, many Irish were shipped over here and sold as slaves also. In the interim between coming here, they'd go down into the Bahamas, where the Irish were sold as slaves.
So you're talking about the British-Irish War.
Yeah.
And when
Cromwell.
Cromwell, yeah. And so at that time they were actually taking the Irish people and putting them in slavery over here?
Here, mostly into the Caribbean, but yes, here too. Matter of fact, there were 4 Kelly brothers who fought in that war against Cromwell, and as prisoners were shipped to the America, because a lot of the Irish were shipped here for petty crimes and such, and also for fighting against Cromwell. And these brothers, and let's see, the seas were very, very hot. So the captain of the ship was afraid that the ship would catch on fire or something, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, he started sailing to the Caribbean, and these 4 Kelly brothers were afraid that they were going to take them to the Caribbean to sell them as slaves. So they, in effect, mutinied and forced the captain to land on these shores. And to escape being indentured, because here they didn't so much call them slaves, they called them indentured servants. So even though they were shipped here against their will, they were made to pay for their own passage on those ships. Most indentured servitude was for 7 years. But a lot of the people who bought the servitude papers would say, no, because you got to pay me room and board, and you got to pay this and this and this. So they never could get that paid off. So some of them spent a lifetime in servitude or slavery here. They couldn't marry without permission of the guy that bought their servitude papers. And there were men who made a living from saying, okay, I'll pay this guy's passage and that woman's passage and blah, 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 and then would keep them as slaves, so to speak, during that however long they decided to keep them into slavery. But when the brothers reached the shores of the U.S., being afraid that they would be caught for mutinying, went off in 4 different directions after they hit the shores.
What became of them, do you know?
Well, one was my ancestor.
Oh, well, okay.
Kelly's
Oh, wow.
Gap.
You Ancestry.com, or you did the ancestry work, right?
Oh, yeah, for more than 20 years.
Wow. Is this where you found this information out?
Yep.
Oh my God.
So, well, tell us about your part of the family.
Well, there's a place called Kelly's Gap, and it's kind of between Tennessee and Kentucky. As you come out of the Appalachian Mountains, that's named for my ancestor. He had kind of an inn sort of thing there, so that people could stop and rest and all that. They traveled with Daniel Boone, and later Crockett stayed at Fort Boonesboro. They fought in every war that there was to fight in, being Irish, including the Civil War, where some brothers lived on one side of a river, or the other brothers lived on the other, and they actually, during this war, fought each other.
You mean the four boys?
Well, their sons, the one that went there, after generation and generation in that area after they came. They ended up fighting against each other.
We're talking the Cromwell, so that had to have been quite a bit before the potato famine. So it was a different.
This was early 1700s, I believe.
Yeah, that'd be right.
So and some went north and some went south into Tennessee and Georgia and Louisiana. And others went towards Missouri, and they were in Missouri by 1835. And then went back for a bit, maybe 15 years. Then went back to Missouri. I think the father died, so some of them went back there to settle that estate and all, and then went back to Missouri. And then on out to Oklahoma.
Now, when you were doing the genealogy, you were doing it for other people too?
Mostly I was doing it for myself, but I did, I have some friends who were curious about theirs genealogy, or maybe they were divorced and wanted the husband's genealogy for the children's sake.
Right.
So I did theirs as well. Found out that my best friend since we were 14, we're related from hundreds of years ago in Kentucky, Tennessee area. Brothers and sisters, one branch became my line and the other branch became hers.
That's fascinating.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because she was born in Tennessee and I was born in northern Indiana, so we had no clue.
So even in that limited group that you looked at, you found connections, genealogical connections.
Yeah. And as I was saying, since my grandmother's family on my dad's side came over on the Mayflower. And when you start looking at all the people related to those who came over on the Mayflower, like Hopkins and such, there are thousands and thousands of people here related from those ships that came over very early on.
Wasn't there only about there was like 300 people on the Mayflower?
Yeah.
Isn't that correct?
Well, I don't know the number. I just know that there were a lot. And, then John Winthrop brought ship after ship after ship of people over. But not only here, but also, because they came here and for whatever reason may have gone to Australia, or back to England or whatever. So to find out, because at one point I had over, I think, 36,000 people in my family tree.
36,000?
Yeah. Now that goes back, because one branch I can take back to like 900.
Wow.
The year. But yeah, and that was early in my research that I had that many, and then I lost all my files. But yeah, 36,000 people. So when you're like, stop and think of that and look at everybody that you're related to, because then you can say, type their name in and then see other people's family trees that you had no clue that were even remotely related. And that's when I first discovered how we're all connected. And if you take that back to the original, what they call now the first two women, then we're all connected that way. But to see it linearly, written down, person after person after person, and back in the pioneer days, some of these families, there were 20 children. Not all of them lived to adulthood, but a lot of them did. And all the different branches from one couple with all those children is astounding. And especially, with men marrying, because often the wife died young because she's pregnant every year. And often they married quite young. That he may have had 3, 4, 5 wives with children, children with all of them. So you're just like, I was just amazed.
Well, I saw a program that was stunning to me. Apparently this guy, I've told the story, but I don't think on this show. There was this guy who went around the world collecting blood samples to do, research into blood around the world. And when he died, another guy, a young protege of his, got a hold of the collection, and by then they had the ability to really look at DNA. So he began to do this analysis of the DNA of the blood work that was done from people all over the world. And what he did was the whole show is about him following the lineage of the DNA. And so he starts in Africa, in this one tribal area that seems to have the base of the DNA that you see everywhere else, from this one group of people. And then because you get what's called a marker, and a marker comes, I think they said it only came through men, and that it only comes around once in a great while. But if you get a change in the DNA and you have a marker, then you can track the marker. Well, which way did the marker go? And tracking these little changes in the DNA, they were able to demonstrate how from this one tribe, the probably because of climate problems, maybe it was famine or lack of rain or whatever, but there was a migration. And some of them went to the north and some of them went to the south, all the way into the Aborigines in Australia. And it was just fascinating because he kept going to these different places, and you'd look at the faces, they were really intent on getting a lot of faces on camera, and you could perceive the northern line and how there was a similarity, and then the southern line, how there was a similarity. They have this core of characteristics, but then there's these subtle things. And the thing that really jumped out at me was the Russians, the area where the Russian people, sort of started to develop, and the faces of those people and the faces of Hopi Indians were so similar. And he would talk to the people, and he would go back into their traditional stories and stuff. And you can see that, okay, so they went up into the north, and then probably the Bering Strait was landmass, and they came into the what became the United States, into American area. Just absolutely fascinating. But what it shows was that we all got the same DNA. There's just subtle changes. And it was, I could understand when I saw it, it was like a theoretical thing, but now, when you're explaining you had 36,000 connections to your one family, we are just one family. What did you think when you started realizing this, Colleen?
Well, it was about, I don't know, I think it was before, people started talking about we're all connected. But I had realized it, gosh, I think this was back in the early 90s. And although I had been meditating and stuff, it hadn't hit me really that we are connected biologically, not just spiritually, but the biological thing is what hit me, was, wow, we are all connected. And it was very eye-opening, a sudden awareness. It's hard to explain because I was overwhelmed, really. And it started making me look at people differently. This could be a relative. May not like them, may want to smack them, but they're related. Or could very well be a direct line of connection that we just haven't found out. And it's like you and I were talking, a year ago, a couple years ago, on your Hopkins line. Because I'm like, whoa, wait, I've got one of those in mine as well. So it's just flabbergasting, you go, gosh, we're cousins.
Family of man.
Mm-hmm.
And women.
Yeah, you could be walking in the street and not realize that you just passed someone who actually is related to you, maybe not even too far away. It's a fascinating thing to think about. And as you said, Colleen, this can really change your perspective on people. That it's not just a spiritual thing, but really a physical thing.
Right.
It's incredible.
Well, see, I had a DNA test done last month. It was just a simple, basic one. And, of course, not surprisingly, it gave a high percentage of Irish, British origins, and a small percentage of Middle Eastern.
Wow.
Which kind of floored me.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It didn't pinpoint it, where in the Middle East, but it was kind of northern Middle East, which included like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey area, so it was kind of a wide area there, but I was like, what? But then again, if you go back to biblical times where everybody started from the 12 original tribes, of course they don't put in any ET thing, but if you go back to those original tribes and when they went their own different ways, and some went in one direction, others in another, it's quite possible that they spread to England and Germany and elsewhere. But I was quite shocked by that. And so I'm going to do another DNA test just on the maternal line. I want to... Because
Can you do me a favor? Because I want to get one done. I'm not going to do it for myself because what's the point? I don't have any kids, but my sister does.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to get it for her to do so that, her kids have a record of it, because she and I would be so, probably be identical. So, but what's the difference in the kits? Do you know? I mean, you've looked at it. I haven't even looked at it yet. I know that there's a special on Ancestry right now for these kits. But do you know anything that you can kind of give me some guidance?
Well, I wouldn't. There's one that's $79. And I'm not sure that I'd even mess with that one. That's the first one I did. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot. I went with the mitochondrial one. It's about $179. It gives you the hap groups, the markers, and all of that. That's the one I would do. You can go up to, you do both the male and female lines. But it's like, I don't know, $300 and something. It's more inclusive. Of course, they do both sides of the family. The female mitochondrial DNA, even though the males possess it, only the females pass that on to their children. So I opted for that.
Wait a minute. Wait, can you explain that again to me?
I'm not sure if I can. It's, I liken it to, you've got the female DNA that females pass to females, and it stays. Whereas the female passed to the male mutates because of the Y DNA in there, I guess. But the male possesses his mother's DNA, but he doesn't pass his mother's DNA to his children. That's the way I understood it.
So this one test, the one that's 100 and what'd you say, 79 or something?
Yeah.
That test is only looking at the woman's genetics, the female genetics?
Yes.
And they can actually, I guess they can differentiate between the male line and the female line.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at just the female line, why would that be something you do? I mean, can you choose to just look at the male line?
You can choose. It's a Y DNA test. So you can check that, and it may, well, it shouldn't. It should just do your father and his father and his father. And there's going to be some mutations because, excuse me, the father's going to have, some of the mother, his mother anyway, but he's not going to pass that down. So there's going to be some mutations. I chose the mother, the mitochondrial, because when doing genealogy, often the women are not even named in wills or census records or whatever. Often in the will it just says to my wife, but it doesn't give her name. And in marriage records, it may not even give her last name, or if she's of age, it's not going to even mention her parents. Often you only find somebody's mother's name, if they can remember it, or the survivor, in death records, and then only at a certain point when they started keeping records, because it'll often ask who the parents are. Well, if the survivor doesn't know the mother's last name or may garble the name, as from memory, often you have, in doing genealogy, what are called brick walls. You can't get past a certain point because you don't know her name. You don't know where she came from other than that they lived in this area and moved to this area. So I wanted to get past some of those brick walls as far as the females on Mom's side were concerned. And
so
because
irritating.
it is, and because, we talk a lot about the feminine energy. I think, personally anyway, it's kind of I have a feeling of loss when you can't find out who the mother is. In Jewish thought, you are Jewish if your mother was Jewish, because you always know who your mama is, where dad may be kind of in question. So I wanted to know more, this whole know thyself sort of thing is, for me, on very many different levels. So my own curiosity, and I've wanted to do this for a long, long time, and finally said, look, you're going to be 65, you better do it now, because there may not be a chance, an opportunity on down the line.
Okay, now here's
fascinating.
Yeah, here's my dilemma, okay? Because the Mayflower, both my father and I didn't even know this until, years down the pike, but he had also decided that because the family had grown up like 300 miles from where you have the Mayflower landing, basically, that you had to have a connection there because of the time frame, how far back everybody could remember, and just the distance. There weren't that many Hopkinses in the population. There wasn't that great a population. But no matter how I looked, and I've never heard of anybody else being able to find a direct connection between our family name of Hopkins and Stephen Hopkins on the Mayflower. However, my brother, who's, he drinks a lot, but he comes up with this story, and I've not been able to confirm with him where he got this story. I've not been able to find it. But he claims that, and I did find out that Stephen Hopkins and this, I think they called him King Philip. Yeah, it was King Philip. They had this Indian, Native American, who was fighting for, to survive. The Native Americans were being overrun by the colonists. And he knew he was going to lose the war. So he asked his friend Stephen, will you get my son to into New York, and the Algonquin people over there, they will protect him. Because if they get me, they're going to try to get him too, because he'd be the next in line. And that the son, in honor of being saved basically by Stephen, took the name Hopkins. And that's where the family line started. Now, that's what I'm interested in. Can we prove that? Would I take the Y or would I take the X, I guess?
You would probably take the Y because you're trying to trace that male line. And what happens is you take the test and it goes into a data bank, and they compare yours with others, and they can prove a direct descendancy from particular people, because the markers all have the same numbers, or they're the same within 1 or 2 points.
Interesting.
I've looked at several because I've got now I'm trying to think, a couple on my chick line, which is my dad's line. Apparently 2 different lines, and one of them changed their name. The spelling or whatever shortened it. So they're trying to determine who is related and who is not. And you can look at all the different markers on that line and see the numbers and where they start to mutate for whatever reason. But there's one line that has a much higher number on it than anyone else in the world. They don't know exactly what that means, but it's interesting.
This is fascinating to me because, all right, so they actually, okay, they take a snapshot of my DNA, let's say. They can actually use that snapshot and go back in time?
Well, they just check it against everybody else's, that
So,
have known, proved, documented lines, genealogy. And you document it through all the different records that are available. And then compare that with the DNA of other people on that line who have had their tests done as well. And yeah, can trace it back and say, yes, you are related.
So the markers actually show up in a particular time frame or a particular line?
Well, if you know when a specific ancestor, where he was, when he was there, because when you do your genealogy, hopefully you're also doing your tree at the same time, or you do your DNA, you're also doing your genealogy, or somebody's done it for you. Because once you start checking, you'll find out that there's a whole bunch of people have also been doing it. And you can move right into that spot where maybe they have a family member that they don't know anything about. Because often, especially for the females, you see a lot of trees with only the males, but you don't see that they had any daughters or anything.
Right.
But when you do the DNA, you go, oh. And then you can put your female right into that tree because the DNA matches. So if you know where they were, when they were there through the documentation, then you can do it like, as you said, through a timeline sort of thing. Because you're related, say, we'll use as a for instance, the Hopkins that were in, Massachusetts in 17 something or other.
Yep.
And that's where your DNA hits theirs, so.
Be interesting to see this. I have to talk to my sister because I want her to do it. Well, she said she would, but then I started looking into it and it sort of started getting complicated to me. I went like, wait a minute.
Yeah, because you go, which one of these should I do? But yeah, it wouldn't matter. You or your sister, it wouldn't matter because it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But as you said, I wanted to do it and then pass that down to my children and then have later them do a DNA for their fathers.
Right.
So that they've got all of that, for posterity, whatever. I find it interesting. They may not, but I know that Carrie is interested. Her father's line, they're big Norse people. Matter of fact, one of her ancestors was said to have a voice. He traveled up and down the river, and he'd sing as he's rowing his boat, and his voice would carry for miles. She has one of those voices. I read that, and I just started snickering because she has one of those voices. I'm going like, Carrie, whisper. She goes, I am whispering.
Does she sing?
She doesn't really sing. But she calls out a lot. Like when Jade was little, playing in the neighborhood, she'd open the back window and holler for her, and all the kids in the neighborhood go, Jade, your mom's calling you.
So, do you still do it at all? Do you play with the or play with it, study it. You probably don't have time now. But
Well, I still do from time to time because I'm still looking for those brick walls to see if anybody else has uncovered anything. And on one line, I have, like I go to the county where the latest birth record was found, and then I start pouring through census records of that county, page after page after page, trying to find that name or names that I know married into that family, because people tended to stay in groups even if they traveled from, say, Virginia to Kentucky. They went, often it was the younger people, they all went together. So I look for names that I know were associated with that family back in Virginia, for instance, and then start checking through the census records, marriage records, death records, church records of that county to try.
Now, are these all online?
Yes, genealogy.com has, when their missionaries go out, when they turn 18, they have to do missionary work. Part of their missionary work is to photocopy, take digital photographs of all of the courthouse records, deeds, wills, and such, as well as birth records, death records, marriage records. Census records are also online. I was really anxious to see the 1940 ones come out for ancestors I have just a few counties away. So those are all online. You can also, if your ancestors haven't been here, say, maybe 50 years, maybe 100 years, and you want to trace them back into, say, Europe or Russia or wherever you want, wherever they came from, you can check ship records. You can even check ship records of the Mayflower. But that, you can get it's called like a worldwide membership, which is a little bit more a month or a year. And also go back and check those records in Europe or wherever, if they're available.
Genealogy.com?
Ancestry.com.
Ancestry, okay.
And that's only for the people in the States, or is it something
No,
because you were saying about...
Yeah, they've got... Well, I know they also have European. It's ancestry.com/EU or something like that, or UK.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as Middle Eastern, I don't know.
For me, even just the European side is going to be very complicated.
The Italian?
My mom's side is, I think it's for me, for example, if I would like to do this, I know my cousin is doing it. He's been doing it for a few years.
The Italian.
But just that alone.
There ought to be, if they were Italian, they were probably Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And the Catholic Church kept birth records, death records, marriage records, confirmation, baptism, and all that. So that makes it easier. Actually, the churches, as much as I'm constantly bitching about the churches, they're a great source of genealogy records.
Yeah, well, you know what's sad from my dad's side is that it's very difficult because, I don't know how it works, but for example, we don't know when my dad was born. So you can imagine, my dad is not that old. He's in his 70s, okay? So, it's not like we're talking about someone who was 100 and something. So even then, when he was born, they didn't keep records. So if you don't know when you're born, then you definitely don't have a birth record. They created one for him, approximating it, just for him to have a document.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually suspect that it's very difficult to find your ancestry if you come from countries of the Gulf, let's say. Egypt or other countries, they did keep records, but because Saudi was such it was a tribal thing, and they didn't have all these things, so they were very backwards. Mm-hmm. That's another interesting thing to kind of contemplate on.
The DNA would help there.
Definitely.
Maybe not so much the records. And, I don't know how much was done through oral tradition and all of that in your family. Because sometimes
the only
that's
thing
all
I
you
know,
got to go with.
That's right. The only thing I know, I'll just say this, and then we're actually over the top of the hour. I know that one of my first ancestors of this family, from my father's side, was those people who persecute people? Like, they cut their heads? When I found out, I was disturbed.
Ooh.
I don't know if it was a joke or not, but yeah, the first ancestor of this family line was when, they get criminals and then they just chop their heads off. I don't know, what do they call it in English? It has a name.
Executioner.
Yes. Exactly, thank you. He was an executioner. So, very, very nice. Lovely.
Just doing his job.
Yeah, he's just doing his job.
Dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Well, there had to be a skill involved.
Oh, come on.
That's true.
True. There's a certain way you gotta swing that sword and make sure your sword is sharp and all of that sort of thing.
Is this a past lifetime memory?
Research, Nancy.
We are at the top of the hour, actually a little over. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back and see where this conversation goes next. Thanks, Colin.
Uh-huh. Alrighty, and we are back.
Yes, welcome back to World Talk with Friends. I've got Nora Willow here with me and Colleen Kelly, and this is Nancy Hopkins. In the first hour, we were talking about genealogy because Colleen's been doing it for years. Colleen, can I ask you some more questions about this? I'm just kind of fascinated.
Sure, I'll try my best to answer.
Okay, so if I wanted to start, I've never done any looking. What is the first thing that you suggest somebody who's interested in this does?
The first thing you do is write down what you know. Talk to your older relatives who still remember this stuff. I wish I had talked to mine more because they know stuff that you don't. Often they talked about it when you were a child, but often you weren't interested, so you didn't pay attention. Go to your oldest living relatives and ask them questions. See if they have Bible records, pictures, whatever, that they'd be willing to either give you or let you take and get copied, so that when they pass, those records, those pictures, and all of that stuff doesn't get tossed out. Because what's important to you is not important to someone else. My grandmother kept a cedar chest full of pictures of her grandparents and great-grandparents and old records and all of that stuff. I've seen them once. I have an uncle that has them, but he won't let anybody look at them now. When he passes, I don't know where those are go, because I don't know that any of his children are interested in genealogy. You know, a lot of people go, I have no idea who's in these pictures, and they just throw them out. Bible records, used to, everybody had a family Bible, and all the births, deaths, marriages were written down in there. And that's what I suggest you do to start. And then you can go on, if you become a member of Ancestry.com, and there are others, but I've Used to be there was a whole lot of free sites that you could go to and exchange information, but they've all gone defunct or been bought out by Ancestry.com. But you can start building your family tree. They have built-in software that you can just start putting in. I start with my mom and my dad because they're both passed, and then add their parents on each one, and you just go that way. And then with Ancestry.com, and you may have seen the shows on TV that they have now where they do genealogy for people who have questions. And then they advertise the software because it gives you a little leaf, like branches on a tree and the leaves. And if there's a match, if somebody's already checked that line, there'll be a match and the leaf will shake. So you click on that and it'll show you all the records with those people in them. And you can compare, and you want to be careful, and you want to then look at the documentation. Go to census records, birth records, death records, blah, 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 and make sure that that is indeed your ancestor or your great uncle or whatever before you merge those two records, and that it's that easy. I learned about 10 years ago that you want to do that, otherwise you get all confused and you get wrong records and you gotta then delete and blah, blah, blah. But check the documentation. And for me, it's always good to see the documentation because you find out that what your ancestor's occupation was. You find out in some instances that they were a Civil War veteran and maybe were crippled or blind in their older years. Sometimes there was a child that was called an idiot, which meant that they were mentally disabled. You can find out if they were slaveholders or not, how many slaves they had. You can find out what their estate was worth, because then taxes in the census records, that's what they were all about, was they had to put a value on their land and their home. Wills give you an idea of what kind of things people possessed. And if they had books, you knew that they were able to read. So there's lots of information that can be gleaned from all of these records that, for me, made the people more real. They were not just a name, a date, and a place. That's my suggestion.
Any questions, Nora?
Well, actually, the question that I had was, after you kind of get all this information, besides the fact of realizing that we're all connected, what do you achieve knowing all these things? Let's say these people all passed away many tens and hundreds of years ago. Why would you need to actually have a family tree? That's kind of my question. For me, it's a fascinating thing, but would there be something that you could use it for?
Well, for me personally, there's always been the admonition to know thyself. Hold on. And,
anybody sending anything?
Hold on a second.
Sorry, anybody sending anything needs to pack it well, because they barely open the front door and check them on the front porch.
Okay. For me, it was that whole know thyself thing. And because I have a strong belief in reincarnation and trying to figure out, why I like this, why I think this, why I've got some of the baggage I've got without having memories of. For me, and there's, what's the word I want? Places, that I've been and I feel like I've lived here before. or sometimes you go somewhere and there's great sadness and you're going, why am I feeling this way? For me, doing the genealogy helps me to understand me better. And maybe some of the genetic stuff, traumas and such that go from generation to generation to generation. For instance, a great-grandmother, her mother died. The father remarried. All of the children went to the orphanage because the stepmother didn't want to deal with his kids.
Wow.
And the same had happened to her mother. So it's generational, that the kids were raised in an orphanage. Often they were said to be farmed out, which meant that they went to an orphanage and someone would take them in for a little while so that they could work the farm. So they were, in effect, child slaves.
That's horrible.
It happened a lot. There used to be orphan trains here where either the parents were very, very poor or split up or whatever. And they would put these kids from the orphanage on these trains and send them out west. Some to be child brides, others to be workers. And, in their family trees, they have no clue where, depending on the age of the child, because the child may not know who his parents or her parents were, where they came from, or any of that. So, yeah.
That's a trauma right there. I mean, do you think that things like that can actually they are recorded in the DNA, but do you think that could be part of realizing that there is some trauma that's not yours, but it has been kind of a hereditary thing in the DNA?
Yes, but I also, because of the reincarnation thing, think that it could be mine,
Right.
Not just because it's in the DNA, but because it could be past life memories. Or, memories of the trauma.
So you're saying practically that part of that cycle of reincarnation is coming back to the same bloodline.
Yes.
The question the reason why I'm asking this is, do you believe that reincarnation is mostly choosing to go back to the same bloodline, or could it be that you can go to someone else completely, to another bloodline completely?
Well, I think my own personal thoughts are that generally, yes, it does go to the same bloodline because there's a spiritual connection. It's kind of a soul group thing. And if not that particular bloodline, then maybe someone close. If you maybe have something that you got to still deal with that's attached to a particular soul, not necessarily person, but soul or soul group.
Right.
And maybe if you've already worked all that kind of stuff out one way or another, I don't know, or you decide you don't want to do it this time around, you might go into a completely different one just for a new experience, a learning sort of thing. And
so you kind of pick and choose depending, because anyway, you have all eternity to do that.
Yeah, and that's just my personal thoughts about it, and I could be wrong. But that's just the way I think about it.
I see it the way you do. I see it the way you do. I believe in that. And it's interesting that you say that. The reason why I ask you is because there is a faction of Islam which actually the Muslims, between brackets, don't consider them Muslims. They are a group that you find a lot in Lebanon, and they're called the Dirzi people. Okay, I don't know what's the word in English, but these people, they say that they're Muslims, but they believe in reincarnation. Now, I worked with a girl like that. And I was so fascinated by this that I had the opportunity to speak to someone who came from this faith. So I kind of like picked her brains, I wanted to know what is this about from the first-hand person. And practically what she told me is that they believe that every child that comes to the family has reincarnated, and usually, in most cases, could have been a great-grandparent, could have been someone who came from the same bloodline, but who comes from an older time, obviously, like a great-grandfather, grandmother, or great-aunt, but they come back. So they take this very seriously. And I was fascinated because I never knew that this existed. And that's part of their religion.
Well, when they're looking for the new Dalai Lama, that's supposed to be a reincarnational sort of thing, too.
Right, yeah. Well, they associate themselves very much with the Buddhists, although they're very different, but they do associate them. There's a lot of similarities with Buddhism and, the Dirzi creed or faith about, the idea that, you choose the Dalai Lama. There are certain processes where, you bring the little child and you make him choose between all these things that the older Dalai Lama used, and if he picks the right ones, blah, blah, blah. So there are different ways to, and the Dirzi people do the same thing. They kind of test the child without influencing them to see what is it that they remember. And it's weird because they give these children, they don't shut them up and say this is wrong. They give these children the chance to express themselves, and usually they're always right.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, were you going to say something, or?
Well, yeah, first off, I wanted to make a comment regarding the concept of genetics and the concept of a soul family, as you say, because the 3D body, the bioelectromagnetic field of the 3D body is going to put out a certain frequency, and it may be that these soul families are just attuned to those bodies. It's much easier for them to assimilate in, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That may be one of the things. What I wanted to ask you, Colleen, was as you were going back in time and looking at these different lifetimes, did you get deja vu feelings?
Sometimes, yes. Okay. My mother and my sisters, my aunts, we were all bartenders, waitresses, okay? 'Cause it paid the best at that point. I had a dream one time about being in this, it was kind of like this one room, huge room, but there was a loft above the room, which was like the sleeping quarters, the living quarters, but the first floor was kind of a bar. So that, and it was owned by a female. So somewhere she had converted a barn into a bar and, well, an inn kind of sort of thing, and quarters for her and her children. And I thought that was rather an odd thing, But then in doing the genealogy, I find that often was the case, not that it was run by a woman, but that homes were kind of made that way so that there was a place for travelers to stop and rest and refresh on their way from one place to another, because it wasn't heavily populated. And there was something else to that too, and I've forgotten where I was going with it. But
well, the deja vu thing.
Yeah. So, and I have gone not connected to this, but I have gone places where I had this huge feeling of deja vu and have no clue where that came from. One was out to Sedona. And I just felt home. This is home. I'd never been out west before, but I do think that there's some connection for me there. I was in tears. There was tears of joy and great tears of sadness, but I have no clue where that came from. Or, you go to a home that's in this area, because I do have ancestors from this area back to the mid-1850s, that I've gone to homes here locally and know I've been there before. I can tell, driving up to the house, so you're hit to that with that feeling, and I know where all the rooms are. And sometimes it's an instant taken back in time thing, and it's just an instant, it's a flash, and then it's gone. Had the same feeling about this house before I'd ever seen it. Carrie was telling me, Mom, I found a house, and I knew what it looked like inside before she'd even started describing it. And my ancestors from this area lived in this county and the next county over. They'd moved from one county to the other for a while and then moved back for I don't know why, but they did.
So did you pick up enough information about those particular people that you could go back to those particular properties?
Well, I haven't pinpointed it yet, but I have found that you can. Census records also give you a street that they lived on, their address at that time, their house number. Also, there are, what the hell are they called? There are books that are put out every year that are similar to a phone book, and they give the people who reside in that house their names and where they work. And often they'll give the street address of the home and or business. What the hell are they called? Anyway, and when you do a search on Ancestry.com, those records will come up and you can go check them out, and also find out, say, where your great-grandfather or grandmother worked in that year. Now, I've not pinpointed that particular, gone back and say, do I know this place and all that kind of stuff. I've not done that, but.
Well, I went to out in Arizona. When I was stationed out there at Fort Huachuca, we went over to Tombstone, and the girl that was with us, there was myself and my housemate, and this girl that was in the class with us, and we'd gone to another school, basic training with her, and her name was Ada Davis, and she was a Native American whose tribe believed in the reincarnation, and actually she was the reason that I got to understand a lot about what was happening to me. And unfortunately, a lot of people that have these deja vu things happening, there's nobody there like Ada was. But it started out with her saying something about, I know the person driving, Suzanne, she says, wonder why there's this green over there, because we're in the desert, we're going, through this desert. I mean, it was all brown. And, no, I said it. I said, why is the river there, is what I said. I said, why is the river there? But I had been I was in the passenger seat, and I'm looking at the road, and in the desert, if you're driving along a road, you'll get this like mirage thing happening that is very hypnotic. And if you're driving, there's something that you got to think about, but when you're not, it's very easy to get really trancy. And so I hear myself say, "What's the river doing there?" And Ada says very nonchalantly, "Well, there was an earthquake in a year, and it moved 1.5 miles." And I turned around and looked at her and I said, "But how did I know that was the river? What river?" And she said, "The San Pedro." And I'm like, "There's a river here?" And, it was like something in my tranced out state had connected with the environment. And my reaction was, why is the river moved? Because somebody lived there before. And she said to me, "Well, maybe you lived here before, and, cause she believed in reincarnation." So as we got into Tombstone was basically maintained as the same physical environment as it had been when this guy lived there. So it was one door after another of deja vu. I kept getting lost into him. She kept talking to me and she was like, "Just relax and get into it and allow the memories to come through." And, so I was very fortunate to have her there to be able to make it so much more meaningful than, it's like you say, there's a deja vu thing, but then it passes. I've had those too. But when you've got somebody there that can walk you into it, it really is like going back into time, because you make a connection to a memory. It's like accessing a server computer with a file of information that now is downloading into your head. I remember at one point I was walking into a door. I was going to go through this door and it was locked. Well, he was going to go through the door. And he got so angry he kicked the door. And man, it hurt my foot so much it pulled me right out of the trance. I kept going trancy back into his mind. And I wasn't thinking sort of like creatively. It was just the lower soul, so to speak, that lower soul memory that was there. So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's some link. His name is Luke Short. Maybe there is. Oh, that would be fun. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be find the genealogy, see if he's actually in my genetic family.
Mm-hmm. Or if, and that, with wills, for instance, and marriages, you may find friends that are maybe not directly related, but close friends. And I think maybe you can, depending on how close you were emotionally to that person, maybe you don't stay in the same family. You trip over into somebody else's for a while. And I also wonder how much of this memory stuff isn't so much memory as maybe a type of remote viewing. And I'm not talking about your experience, but mine more. Because I do question that. Is that my memory, or have I somehow jumped back into a different timeline, sort of something or other, If that...
That's very interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, you have to be careful, because I say that when you do a remote viewing, you don't know where you're going unless you have an anchor. But your family member, the fact that family member, the genetics itself, could have like been used as an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where is the memory kept? Is it kept in the genetics, the DNA?
Well, they often talk about DNA memory, or genetic memory. So it's a lot of stuff, to ponder. I find it all fascinating.
Yeah, the DNA, and we touched on this last night. Walt asked me a question about it, but the DNA is 10% what is giving human beings, I mean, when they're testing, they're only testing like 10% of the DNA because only 10% of it has been what they call mapped, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. And you got this 90% that looks like junk DNA. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything.
Well, that's on the American side. I'm wondering how Russians treat all that. You know, and if you had a DNA test done here and also had one done, say, in Russia, what the differences is in what it would show. Because they don't classify it as junk.
No, they think that we're crazy. But see, I think that let's say the Western scientists have probably know more. They just don't tell us. But the Russians, they've got the 90% that they really have been looking at. And when you do the research done on DNA in the Soviet Union and then in Russia, it's absolutely astounding the amount of information that's contained in the 90%. If every variation of all these different peoples can be in the 10%, you can imagine what is available in 90%. And they think of it now as a biological computer, internet. In that it's not just a matter of sending out signals that are used by the cells to continue to be kidney cells and continue to, be recreated as kidney cells, but it goes way beyond that. And that's when you begin to kind of understand the potentiality of DNA actually holding memory. It's like a computer system, except that instead of it being electromagnetic, it's bioelectromagnetic in that it's chemistry and energy following geometry within the construct of the DNA itself. And one of the most important, there are so many tests that they've been able to do, so much things they've been able to prove, but the thing that always, just really struck me to the core was the fact that you can program this DNA, computer system, internet system. It's almost like, the hardware, even though it's biological. And so the software coming into it is, what program is it? So where's the software coming into it? Well, they found the most potent software, the software that would make the most changes in DNA was the human voice. You program your DNA with the human voice. And that's pretty, pretty big to think about. That if you're saying bad things, that's what your DNA is matching to. And it is vibration, it is energy, it's resonance concepts. But,
well, the way I see it is that the DNA and the blueprint that's in the spiritual, like the etheric, are kind of connected. Because if we go into the DNA, we go deeper in, we'll find that it's all vibration. So, I kind of see them one and the same thing. But the DNA is a more physical manifestation of that.
Well, we don't really know the limits of DNA. It's like, because that's what Walt was talking about too, is that when you think in conceptualization of DNA as a 3D object, you're only seeing one view of it, that is multidimensional, just like you're alluding to. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but Amelia Benz was just clearing up her recordings of sessions she'd had on the telephone with the clients. And she starts hearing this one, she doesn't remember it. Doesn't remember even having it. And it's about the Anunnaki. And she's telling this client of hers that the Anunnaki have created a very bad situation in their home world because of the manipulation of DNA here on Earth. That when they left, they were supposed to have wiped out all of the DNA, but apparently some of it, got through. And then you have to think in terms of the Great Flood and Noah, Could it be that Noah had the DNA, and survived? But what happened is that as human beings became enlightened, we, started waking up. We were understanding the potential of going through another consciousness evolution, all of this. The DNA was acting like a communication connection to the DNA in the Anunnaki homeworld. And the Anunnaki have a society where you have the leaders and you have the workers. The workers were waking up over there, and they traced it to the fact that we were waking up over here. So you have to, sort of like, well, here's another story. Is it true? Well, Anili's got no reason to make it up. She's got a lot of crazy stories. But, it just, and because of the work that, and I can't remember all of it right now, but there is so much that they're discovering about the power at the DNA level, at the cellular level, that you kind of have to look at the overall human body and say, well, if the cells can do all this magical stuff, what does this human body, what's it capable of? So, now I wanted to ask you back, right, Carl?
Yep.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, the Rosalie, do you see any of your past ancestors in her? Can you detect anything? Does she feel like an old soul to you?
She feels like an old soul. But as to whether she's one of my ancestors or one of Jade's, I've not determined. Jade, I felt when she was born and when she was little. I felt that she definitely is one of my ancestors. Matter of fact, I swatted her on the butt one time. She must have been 4, and she turned around. She said, "When you were my kid, I never spanked you."
Oh, my.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa. And I think I looked at her and I go, "Are you my mom?" And she wrinkled her nose up and giggled just like my mom used to do.
Wow.
And that's the only time I've ever seen her do that, Jade. So I was like, whoa.
That's freaky.
And we have things like that happen from time to time in this family. And getting back to the whole memory, reincarnation, DNA thing, I think that some of this, we look at our relatively recent ancestors, but what if we go back thousands of years, where we don't have any record of them being in existence, nor our connection to them, so to speak. But perhaps some of these memories could be much, much older than we even consider. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I have memories from way back. But again, you have to wonder, are these memories? Or are these states of imagination? Or is it remote viewing? Or, and does any of it matter? Because reality is what we think it is.
Well,
so.
Exactly. Now I've done some past life regression on myself. And also had some readings and such, but I have memories of being a Native American male several times where And this was long before the white man came to this country, where I was one of those who went out before everyone else and, like checked out the land and the surroundings to see if this would be a good place to move the village, because often they were rather transitional. I don't know what they were called, scouts or whatever, or just one who goes before, I don't know. But I have memories of being that type of Native American male several times, which may also go along with my rather hermit sort of existence, because I didn't stay with all of the people. I would go back from time to time, but mostly I was out by myself, or a few of us, as kind of a scouting sort of person. Protected, looked for dangers, looked for signs that anything might be happening, that sort of thing.
Probably looking for places that's got food, too.
Yeah, resources. What, is this a good place for us to camp for a bit, for the season or whatever?
Well, that would tie into your gardens,
Mm-hmm.
Know plants and feeling an affinity for them. You'd want to know that, what's edible in the area.
And watching out for everybody, watching out for dangers, possible dangers and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I was a male, yeah.
Kind of strange.
Hmm.
So do you have any insight into their spirituality? I mean, if you get that far back and you're really into somebody like that, do you feel them inside you, or is it like you're looking at them from the outside?
Oh, I have a definite connection with that. It's almost like I can see through their eyes. Feel what they feel. And of course there was a deep, deep connection to the earth. Even more so than to the tribe, the family. There was that deep connection to the earth.
As you described this, it reminded me of flying into Atlanta, and the plane was just flying over flat land. It was just like a flat land, and I kind of was just looking down at this flat land, and all of a sudden I felt myself running in this flat land, there's a certain high you get when you're running, and that person was in this, but I was in this body, but at the same time that I was being in this body, I was also looking down from the plane, and I swear to God, it was very strange to me because it almost felt like there was a time warp or something, and I could actually, not so much physically, but etherically visualize this person running at the same time I was inside that body running. And I knew it was I knew the tribe. I mean, I had the memory, of where the tribe was, what he was doing there, everything. It just was like I just kind of got immersed in him. And then I was having this freaky thing from the plane looking down. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but you're talking about that. It's just like all of a sudden I was back in that plane, oh yeah, and there was that. I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, well, memories are very fascinating because it seems like you're saying, my daughter has the same thing, she tells me every once in a while, I don't know, but I get this memory, and it feels like, she's like, I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's there. I just can't explain it, but I feel it, and I know that I've experienced it. And she's like, I see places that I know that I have not visited, now in this lifetime, but I've seen them and I remember them. She even shared with me this very strange incident where she said that she saw herself holding on to a cliff. She was falling, and she's like, I can see the cliff, and then there's this huge, like, I think there was water beneath, and she was just holding on to the cliff with her hands, like literally dangling. And she said, I remember seeing you and my dad, her dad, helping me up. And I was like, did you see us or did you just know it was us? She's like, no, I just knew it was you. She's like, I don't know, maybe I was seeing his face like the way he is now, but I knew that it was you and him. Now, that never happened. I would remember. And we've never been together in a place where there was a cliff, and it seemed almost like somewhere in Scotland, Ireland. This kind of nature with the water in the bottom is you don't find it everywhere. There are certain parts of the world where you can find that kind of nature. So we definitely didn't go to any of those countries, and that has never happened. So she's like, but it's a clear memory, and I remember it very well. So what does that mean? She thought maybe it was a dream. She's like, but I know it's not a dream. It feels like a memory. How can you explain things like that? So.
Now, Colleen, when you're working with Rosalie, because I've done this, if you get a young kid, it's almost like they do remember. Now, Nora's daughter is 14, but the kids, I think they have more memory in them. Maybe the veil of forgetting is fading. And I know she can't talk, but she probably is very good at telepathy. And I just found that when my sister-in-law had a baby and he was there at Christmas, she had a Christmas morning, and by Christmas afternoon he was there. And so I'm looking at this kid and I'm like talking to him and trying to get connected to him telepathically. And it was just a very, very profound kind of experience. I don't think anybody should underestimate the depth that these kids may have especially when they're just born and they're not been screwed up by the school system. But interesting stuff.
Yeah, about school ages when they seem to be losing all those memories, abilities, whatever. It's like they have to put that away.
Yeah, because they need to fit in. It's like a survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm. And memorize what they're told to memorize. So it's a different function of the brain, the memory versus the memory. If that makes sense, the rememberer for memorizing versus the memory of past experiences.
Yeah,
the mind overlay.
Yeah, I guess the school education or the society in general is kind of made in a way where you use mostly your left side of the brain. Because I think these things come from the right side, the intuition, these unexplained memories. So as you said, you memorize, you have to kind of like use your logic. That's really left brain. So if school can actually has some sort of integrity where the child goes through the balance between the two, then I think we would be living in a completely different society. But you notice, school is mostly logic driven. It's very left brain driven. So that's, I think, part of why kids just forget, because they don't exercise the right side of the brain anymore. And when they go home, their parents don't really give them much attention. Even if they try to say certain things, they're like, oh, you're just imagining it, or they just dismiss it. So, the more you dismiss, the child just shuts down that part of his brain.
Hopefully by the time she goes to school, that will all have changed. So we got 3 minutes left. Anything, either of you, any other tips on ancestry? Now, what if you have somebody that has already been starting that there's a lot of information from somebody? Is it the shortcut to get a hold of these people? Can you sort of piggyback on their database?
Well, yes. often when it shows you that there's a match, the person's email address is in there, plus a little information about them and how long they've been researching. And you can send them a message on Ancestry.com, or you can email them directly and ask them, for instance, if you've got records that are missing or documentation, or if they've got pictures that they may have up that are private because they don't want to share them with everybody, or Bible records or whatever, you can contact them directly and see if they'll share with you. Often it's a share situation. They'll say, yeah, I'll send you this if you can send me this. And I have in the past contacted or been contacted by several people who do have those records. Maybe I've done the initial research and put stuff together and been able to fit them into my tree, but I didn't have their records. And maybe they have stuff that, we don't have. One fellow, I was researching the Brown side of the family, and was able to fit him in, and he called me. He, with his mother, called me unexpectedly. And he was going to go to this place in Herkimer, New York, where our collective ancestor was from, and photograph digitally all of the records that this man had assembled as being the clerk, deacon of a church. He was also the county clerk. So he had all the records written down, and they had been discovered. So this guy was going to go out there and photograph all of them and put them on a CD and send to me, which he never did. But I've had others that do. For instance, the Kelly men got land out in Oklahoma because their mother was Native American. But she died before the land was granted, so they didn't get the land. A woman sent me that record where it had been applied for and denied, but it didn't give a whole lot of information because I was trying to pinpoint that, family history says that she was Native American, says that she was Chickasaw. And I was hoping that that would document that, because we have all these family histories that are verbal or written in Bible records that we want to document. Not so that we can get any money or anything, just for our own personal satisfaction. So, yeah, there are people, to make a long story short, that you can contact and get other information.
And have you ever found a cousin or something that family, because they're basically family, correct?
Yeah, I found a great aunt.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And I had heard my mom and my aunts talk about her, but I had never met her. And I was doing the genealogy, and she contacted me. Well, actually, there's forums that you can go to, either based on the city or the town or the county or the family name, and ask questions. I'm looking for such and such, born approximately this date in this county, and exchange information that way, and that's how we got to know each other. She's going, whoa, that was my grandfather, and I've got this information. It was quite surprising, because somebody had 2 wives. Yeah, they didn't know about each other.
Really?
So,
and how the heck was that?
Yeah. So that, and it's so much fun for me anyway, to get that new connection and to find out more information. Like I said, rather than it just being names and dates and all that. You know, you get a glimpse into who that person was.
Well, listen, we're at the, actually we're over the hour, top of the show. Thanks so much. I appreciate you. This has been fascinating, Colleen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I hope it's intriguing to other people. But just, the connection. Awesome. Anything else you guys want to say?
Now, me, I just want to say thank you so much for this amazing information.
Yeah.
I thank you both. This, to me, has been a fascinating show because, you know, I've talked a lot, which I don't usually do. And I thank everybody for listening and hope you all found it very, very interesting. Coming up next, we have the fans of Whitley Strieber's show, where he's talking to Leslie Kean, the famed author of the bestseller UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. And today also, Whitley has, where the heck is it? He does another segment with his wife, Anne, and I'm not seeing it here, so gosh. Oh, here it is. He's working with Anne again. And then that will be followed by Jeremy Bainey's Abductions in the Language of the Heart. And then after that, I'll be switching over to These Changing Times Radio for The Big Puzzle with Barry Prince. And then it's Producer's Choice. So I'll also be doing the second part of the book that I'm reading by Dunvalo Melchizedek, Living in the Heart. And then we'll be doing replays of today's shows.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. See you next time, and we'll be live on Saturday. And you've got Friday's show, Barbara. So, thanks again, Nora. Have a great week. And I guess you better go call your daughter. Don't forget that you...
I will. I'll call her back right now. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Colleen.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, Colleen. Bye, Nancy.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for visiting. You have been listening to World Talk with Friends, a Haggy Shack radio production simulcast over the Wolf Spirit Media Network.